Okay, thank you, everybody. Good morning. I now call to order the meeting of the directors of the New York Convention Center Development Corporation, CCDC, for Wednesday, May 27, 2015. The directors have received the written materials in advance of today's meeting, and they are free to ask questions at any time. Please note that we welcome public comment on the items on the following agenda. To ensure maximum opportunity for participation, speakers representing themselves may speak for up to 2 minutes each, and those representing groups may speak for up to 4 minutes, one speaker per group. Speakers' comments may address only items considered at today's meeting. Before we begin the substantive portion of the meeting, we would like to ask the directors whether anyone has a potential conflict of interest with respect to any of the items on the agenda. If so, I would ask you to please make an appropriate disclosure on the record at this time, and we will then be sure that you may recuse yourself from any discussion or vote with regard to such item or items.
I have such a disclosure. On item 2A, our firm represents both Citigroup Global Markets Inc. and Bank of America, so I'll recuse myself at least from that part of it that relates to the selection of the underwriters.
All right, thank you. It's duly noted. Our first order of business today is the approval of the minutes of the March 30, 2015 director meeting. Are there any questions, comments, additions, or deletions? If not, I'll entertain a motion for approval. Second?
Second.
Thank you. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Thank you. Barbara Lampin will now present the next agenda item requesting authorization to appoint me to the Board Finance Committee of the New York Convention Center Development Corporation. Barbara?
Sure. So we have 2 items on the agenda today in connection with a current refunding of a hotel unit fee secured bonds that were issued in 2005 that are backed by $1.50 a night tax on hotel rooms in the 5 boroughs of New York City. And those funds were the sole source of funding for the renovation and expansion of the Javits Center that's just been completed. Rob Godley, the treasurer of the parent corporation and the subsidiary corporation, is here to present to you a full explanation of what the current refunding involves and what it yields for the development corporation. But I'm going to take the first item, which is authorization to appoint Mr. Henry Silverman to the Bond Financing Committee of the New York Convention Center Development Corporation and to take related actions. At a meeting of the Board of Directors of the New York Convention Center Development Corporation held on July 26, 2005, and in anticipation of the issuance by the corporation of the hotel bonds, the Board considered and passed a resolution establishing a bond financing committee consisting of 3 members of the Board of Directors. The Board delegated to the committee the full power and authority of the directors to undertake or cause to be undertaken all actions and responsibilities that may be necessary or appropriate for the issuance of the bonds. The directors appointed the Messrs. Kevin Corbett, Edward Kane, and Michael Carey to the committee and further delegated all future activities involving the sale or issuance of bonds or notes of the corporation to the committee. The directors also gave the committee the authority to delegate 1 or more officers or employees of the corporation such authority and responsibility with respect to any sale or issuance of bonds or notes under its jurisdiction as the committee in its sole discretion shall deem necessary or appropriate. The corporation anticipates undertaking the current refunding of the hotel bonds pursuant to the provisions of the bond resolution adopted by the corporation on November 3, 2005. Inasmuch as Mr. Corbett is no longer a director of the corporation, it is recommended that the chairman, Mr. Henry Silverman, be appointed to the committee in his stead. The requested action is the directors are requested to appoint Mr. Henry Silverman to the Bond Financing Committee. Any questions? Comments?
Okay, if there are no questions, I'll entertain a motion for approval.
So moved.
Second? Second. All in favor? Aye. I apologize for dragging all of you here just for this business, but Blame it on Barbara.
Well, Rob will explain what the transaction entails, and it's on a very tight time frame, and why it's on a tight time frame. So you'll see that going forward, we will need to have the committee of three available to respond on relatively short notice to any of the decision-making that needs to occur in connection with the refunding. I'm sorry, you have a
Yes, one
question.
question. I think that's great that the chairman is joining the committee. I wasn't clear from the material that you provided whether the we're also need to or are reaffirming the authority of the committee and whatever limits there may be, particularly as it relates to authority associated with this bond issue, and also the question of delegation of authority to employees. Are we just saying that the 2005 resolution remains in effect?
It does remain in effect.
Which clearly does, but do we, it's unclear from that whether, do we need to
Ratify?
reaffirm that
I don't
in
believe
connection
so.
with
No.
this refunding or
No,
not?
no. All we're doing is we're recognizing, and I explained what was contained in that 2005 resolution, which is full delegation of authority to the members of the committee. And what we are doing now is that had been a standing committee with no need to take any action on any matter. It's down one member, and the purpose of the resolution is to appoint that member to the committee.
Thanks.
Legal, any?
Well said.
So we want to take a vote on this, if there aren't any other questions? Sorry.
Yeah, we can vote again.
We can vote again.
Okay,
Ron, you want to explain the transaction and then take the next action?
Yeah, I will be asking for authorization to proceed with the transaction, but what we thought would be best here is to kind of give some background as to what, where the bonds are right now and what our plans are for the refunding of these outstanding bonds. The bonds were issued in November 2005, and the par amount of the bonds when they were issued was $700 million. And the proceeds were used to finance the expansion and renovation of the Jacob Javits Convention Center. As Barbara mentioned, the bonds are backed by a $1.50 a night hotel unit fee imposed on hotel room rentals in the 5 boroughs. Legislation imposed this fee beginning in April 2005. Bonds also have a credit support agreement with the State of New York Mortgage Agency. And Sony Mae has agreed to pay up to 1/3 of the debt service should there not be sufficient funds in the revenue account or the debt service reserve account. And it's worth noting now, in the 10 years that the bonds have been outstanding, we have not had the need to tap into the Sony Mae credit support agreement. The bonds are refundable at par this coming November, and given the low interest rate environment that we're in right now, it is the corporation's intent to refund the bonds and take advantage of the low interest rates, and it's estimated on a net present value basis, it will save the corporation $78 million in debt service payments. Now, to further go through the transaction, you have in front of you a couple handouts, and the first handout I would like to discuss is a series of numbers, and on the spreadsheet, we have laid out for you.
You have an extra copy, I don't have one. Oh, this is it, I'm sorry, excuse me. Go right ahead.
All right.
Sorry.
That's fine. So on this spreadsheet, you see the current bond that is outstanding right now, you see our proposed refunding bond, and you see the economic benefit that we plan to arrive at by issuing the refunding bond. In the left-hand column is the current bond that is outstanding. And the key thing that we should focus on the current bond, that if you look at the principal payments, they are backloaded onto the debt service. If you look in 2016, we have a debt service payment of $19 million, but if you go down to 2046 when the bond matures, the debt service payment is $60 million. This was done intentionally in 2005 because of the unknown revenue stream that we were getting for the bonds, the hotel unit fee. we weren't quite sure how strong that was at that time. There was no history behind it, so we intentionally backloaded the maturities of this bond. Now that we have 10 years of revenue streams from the hotel unit fee, we are looking at refunding this bond with a level debt service bond. And by looking at the middle three columns here, you can see under the debt service column, every year we plan to have $42.1 million in debt service, which is what the name is referred to as level debt service throughout the bond. When we looked at the structure for the bond that we plan to refund the current bond, we had three criteria in mind. One is that we did not want to extend the maturity of the current bond. We didn't want to issue any more debt. We wanted to keep the debt outstanding at the level where it is right now. Nor do we want to increase the annual debt service higher in any of the years. And this level debt service meets those three objectives. So now if you go to the next three columns, you see where the benefit is of doing this refunding bond compared to the bond that is outstanding right now. But I'd like to draw your attention to the negative numbers that are in the first 8 years or so. These negative numbers are fully understandable because, as I said, the bond that is outstanding right now, the maturities are backloaded. So we don't have principal payments in the next year, 8 years, that, the current level debt service bond will take out those amounts. So as a result, we have these negative annual debt service numbers. But if you go down further in this column, you see the benefit of doing this transactions where the debt service turns positive, and even when the bond matures, in that year we have, on a cash basis, $17 million. But when you discount back these benefits of doing the refunding bond using the bond yield, you get a net present value savings of $78 million. And this is what we're focused on, is getting that net present value savings. So by determining the structure of the bond, we've now then looked at the financing schedule. And the next page is the financing schedule for the bond. And the way we came up with this financing schedule, we wanted to close the bond by the end of August. And there were two main drivers that we considered in order to make this decision. One is, we are in this low interest rate environment. There's news out there that the interest rates are going to go up. We did not want to miss this opportunity, so we wanted to get out there, issue the bond, and lock in these low interest rates. The next major consideration we had is, when you look at the forward issuance calendar, New York State is a heavy bond issuer in the final months of the calendar year. And including ESD, we will be out there with a $1 billion bond. So come November and December, New York has many bonds being issued in the market. We wanted to stay away from that heavy issue. We wanted to do it in August so we get better focus and highlights on the transaction. And we think we will get better pricing because we'll be the only New York State paper out in the market at that time. So having the decision made that we want to close the bond by the end of August, we then went back with the financing schedule. And we put in all these events that we need to meet in order to make that closing by the end of August. And if you look at the financing schedule, on May 27th, we have the CCDC board, which we're here right now presenting this for your approval. And we have other events going forward. The next major event that we have down here, and it's not to say these other events are not major, but we have to go up to the Public Authorities Control Board in Albany and have them authorize the refunding. And one of the issues I'm going to present to the board today is to get authorization for us to make the application to the Public Authorities Control Board. So we will be going up to PACB on June 17th to get their authorization. A next major event here is we're going to the rating agencies to have them rate the refunding bond. Currently, the bond is only rated by Moody's and has an A1 rating by Moody's. It's our intent to also go to Fitch and have Fitch rate the bonds. And the decision to go to Fitch was primarily because Sonny Mae, who has the credit support agreement, has a relationship with Fitch, and we felt that with existing communications already there with Fitch, it would be to our advantage and would save time if we went back to Fitch and had them rate the bonds as well. It's also our understanding by having two rating agencies rate the bond, it opens it up to more investors. Investors have criteria that they need to have their investments rated by two rating agencies. So we feel that by adding Fitch on here with Moody's, that will increase the population of investors. And then, for the week of August 3rd, we will be coming back to the CCDC Bond Financing Committee, and at that meeting, we will ask for authorization for the terms and conditions of the bonds that we plan to sell, and we also will ask for approval of the bond documents associated with the transaction. And if you go down to August 20th, we have to go back to Albany and have the Office of the State Controller approve the deal. So all the terms of the transaction that we have negotiated, we go up to the State Controller, and then he will sign off on the bond. He is the last sign-off we need, and once that is done, we can close the bonds at the end of August. But before I go into the formal presentation, are there any questions I could answer? Yes?
Was there any consideration made of issuing a larger amount than $700 million? Because presumably you could raise more principal with the same debt service as we currently have.
Right. That was considered, but, part of the bond documents, we will have the ability, we have an additional bond test in the documents, that, if there's a need to issue more debt, if the revenue is stronger, we can do it at that time. So the thing is, the option was explored, but we felt that, by having this capability, we could do it, down the road, if not now.
Well, you won't get benefit of the lower interest rates then.
That's right, but the thing is, we might raise the money now, but we need to be able to spend the money now. So, we're working very closely with Barbara and Joe Chan and his group to find use for the funds. We wouldn't want to raise the funds and keep it and get negative arbitrage and a negative yield in this environment. Yeah.
Could you explain what happens with the surplus revenue, which presumably there must be a lot of, given the structure of this?
Right. That revenue is, by law, stays with the convention center. Any project within the convention center, it can't go anywhere else.
And so do you have a projection of, going to the chairman's point, do you have a projection of anticipated surplus off of this refinancing?
Well, what you could see...
because, of course, that depends on your projection of the revenues as well.
Right,
so you can't derive it from the savings. Right?
And what we have done, part of this whole study here, part of the whole transaction, is we will be hiring a consultant to look at that revenue. We had a consultant, HVS, do the revenue study back in 2005. We are going to hire, Citibank is going to hire a revenue consultant, and at that time we will know, have a better feel for that number.
Well, I would like to just, unrelated to the bond financing side of it, just in terms of the development corporation side, I think it would be interesting and important to know what the anticipated surplus from the current revenue stream is, so that the members and the board can think about it.
Sure. Once we get this study done, we'll be able to come back with Barbara and address these numbers.
And can I ask one more question
sure.
in that regard, which is, in terms of the revenue stream itself, have we been looking, or has anybody else been looking at adjusting either the $1.50 or the entities to which the $1.50 is applied as on a going forward basis, particularly the Airbnb type structure?
I am not qualified to answer that question.
Who would, and presumably...
There is no answer to that question at this time. The Hotel Association and various other entities in the city are addressing Airbnb, the fact that they don't pay taxes, the fact that they do not conform to the laws that all of the hotels need to conform to. There is a portion of Airbnb that could be considered legal under the current state and city law, but the majority of Airbnb is illegal because they do not fall within the parameters of the law. So right now there is no answer to that question, but at some point I would hope that those portions that portion of the Airbnb program that is within the law, that they get socked with the same expenses that we do, and then we have a level playing field. As far as the other, we're waiting for the mayor's office, and we're waiting for the state now to enforce the law that we have on the books, which there has not been, well, there's been very little
If
enforcement.
it were enforced, would the $1.50 be applied to those rooms?
Well, I certainly would push for that. Only as to the legal portion.
What kind of terms are you looking at to achieve this? And are you thinking of employing a swap at all?
No. There'd be no derivatives. This would be a fixed-rate bond, a 30-year maturity. There'd be no swaps associated with it.
Fixed rate for the...
Fixed rate.
Now, you say a 30-year maturity, but you just said earlier that
Final maturity. We will have maturities in every year, a 30-year final maturity.
I had a question.
Sure.
The schedule, what's the schedule most sensitive to in terms of not making the schedule?
Well, we're also looking at sensitivity analysis. We have maybe 5 or 6, sensitivity analysis.
Good.
We went back and we looked at, of course, 9/11 and the impact, and we also looked at the impact of 2008, 2009 when the financial markets imploded. We're looking at, how fast the recovery was after those. So we're right now doing those sensitivity analysis, and even when we look at those sensitivity analysis and the recovery with those 2 incidents, we still feel that there's sufficient revenue coming from